It seems like everyone is using Fuel from Musik Hack. This new plugin utilizes limiting, compression, saturation, and a little bit of EQ in a few easy to use controls to improve your mix. And they've kind of made it a no-brainer by introducing it at a really affordable price and providing a 10-day unrestricted trial. But once you get hold of this plugin, how are you going to use it? Well, I'm going to show you 4 ways to use Fuel in your mixes to get you started. So the first and perhaps most obvious use of Fuel is for loudness during mastering, but I'm going to show you 3 different methods of using this plugin for that outcome. The first is to simply make use of the massive loud knob, which is in the middle of the interface. This uses the Musik Hack loudness algorithm, which they describe as being really transparent. I'll let you decide in the comments down below later whether you agree with that or not. Now, I do believe it might be the same algorithm as they're using in their other famous plugin called Master Plan, which I reviewed on this channel a couple of times before. Now, before I go ahead and simply dial in a setting here, I quickly want to talk about another feature, which is the Unity feature. When we switch Unity on up here, basically we'll be bypassing any loudness benefits from the plugin so that we can focus on any other sonic characteristics without being distracted by the fact it simply got louder. However, on this occasion, I definitely want to hear the loudness, so I'm going to switch this off, but I will be using the output control here to kind of compensate a little bit for what the plugin is doing. Now, let me just dial in a setting here and I'll explain the method in my madness between these 2 controls afterwards. Now, you may be thinking here, hang on, Mike, didn't you just sort of turn the volume up? Well, if that's what you're thinking, that's a really good thing because it means you were not very aware of the limiting which was happening. Let me switch over to my oscilloscope view so you can see what I mean by this and how I was actually using that output control to compensate. You can see here the before and after views of my waveform with this track. The pink being the after view and the blue waveform being the before view. Now you can see here that in most cases the actual peak value, the very loudest part of the pink after signal, is no louder than the original signal. But it sounded a lot louder because the lower portions in between those peaks are in fact much louder, and that's what the limiter's doing there. In fact, I think they're around about 4 or 5 decibels louder. So that's how we perceive things as being louder without the peaks actually being any louder at all. And it's a very, very quick way of getting a result. Let's just do another quick before and after listen. And this time I also want you to look at the before and after LUFS values in the plugin itself. So let's start off with the plugin bypassed. And now switched on. So you will have seen there that we had a before LUFS value of around about sort of -16 or so, I think, and it went right up to around about -7 or so. So a lot more loudness there with one simple loud control. I love it when things are really easy. However, with the second method, I actually think I prefer the result just a little bit. So I'm going to turn the loudness back down again, and I'm actually going to switch it off. And we can do that on this plugin just just by clicking on the label of the control to switch it off. I'm just going to reset my output here back to normal. I'm going to leave the oscilloscope on, however, so you can see the effect of the various controls I'm going to use. And again, I will be adjusting the output here and there. The first control I'm going to use is some compression. I switch that on over here by clicking on the compression control, and we've got a choice of two different compressors here. The first one is a sort of a regular broadband compressor. It's got a ratio of 3.5 to 1, so it's fairly modest, and it's got a fast attack and release. The other one, called OTT, standing for over the top, is a multi-band compressor. With this, we're going to sort of tame the low and high extremes when it's got a low value, and it's going to sort of flatten things out a bit as we get higher. However, I just want broadband compression in this case, so I'll switch back to my normal compressor and dial in a reasonably modest value here. So again, compensating and roughly matching the peaks, we can see the quieter passages have got a little bit of a loudness change here by around about, I'm going to say, sort of 2 decibels or so, which is a nice subtle increase. But I'm going to go ahead and use some other controls here. The next one I'm going to use is this soft clip control over here. So it's a soft clipper which sort of rounds off the transients in a really nice way, and also uses saturation as well. This is a really nice benefit, but you've just got to be a little bit careful not to go too far with it. So again, really pushing up those quieter passages. The next control I'm going to go for, related to compression, is this body control over here. So this is upward compression. Upward compression, for those of you who don't know, is where we push the signal up when it's below the threshold. Okay, normal compression, we will reduce the signal when it's above the threshold. This works in kind of the opposite way. Again, I'm going to use this reasonably subtly. I don't want to introduce any pumping, which is too obvious anyway, which you can get with this control. So I'll do that now. Okay, I like that roughly where it is. The next control I'm going to use is the bass control down here. I'll switch it on by clicking on its label, and this gives us a little boost at around about 80 hertz or so, or around that area. But perhaps more significantly, it adds in some saturation, some low-end saturation. And this is going to help to add a little bit of sort of thump in that low end for me. So let's have a listen. Our next control is the thick control. I'll switch it on. Now this one, I feel like you have to be a little bit careful with this. This adds saturation across the frequency range. It focuses a little bit more on the mid-range as we turn it up. And you're also going to hear the mix get a little bit wider, which can be a good thing, but also can be a bad thing, because you lose a little bit of sort of emphasis on some of the things, like perhaps like the snare or something like that, or the kick. So I'm going to push that up, but pretty carefully. Okay, so let's kind of get an appreciation for the sum of all the adjustments I've made here, starting off in bypass mode. Okay, now for my final method, things are going to get kind of crazy because I'm going to reintroduce the loudness knob first of all. And initially, this is going to make things pretty awful. Let's do it anyway. When I say awful, I just mean that we've pretty much lost any dynamics which are there, and you can see that with that sort of typical sausage waveform that we used to get in the loudness wars. Are they over yet? Let me know in the comments down below. But the point of this method here is not to leave it like this. What I'm going to do here is use this for some sort of parallel processing, parallel compression mostly. And I'm going to do that simply by using the mix knob down here. So what we're going to do is take this extreme loudness benefit we've got here and blend it in with the original dry signal. Let's try that. Okay, so I've shown you 3 different methods of loudness with this plugin here. I'm going to invite you to use the chapter feature down below with YouTube so that you can have a listen to the 3 different demos of those 3 different methods, and let me know in the comments down below which of those 3 you think I had most success with. My second use of Fuel is really very different indeed. I'm using it on some lead vocals on a fairly light sounding track, and I'm aiming to get a little bit more presence. Now, if you happen to be using multiple instances of Fuel, one of the cool things you can do is click on the logo here to change the skin. That helps you sort of differentiate one from another. I'm going to put it on this nice light blue skin, which I think is suitable for this vocal. Now, I don't need to go through every control here because you already understand them from the previous example. So I'll just quickly say that I've dialed in just a little bit of compression here, a reasonable amount of body, that's upward compression, remember, and just a tiny amount of limiting. Now I'm going to switch over to my oscilloscope view before I play it. I'm going to play it both bypassed and on so that you can see and hear the difference. And if you don't mind, I'm going to play a slightly longer example so that we get through the quieter part of this song into the slightly louder part, because I want to talk about that in a moment. So let's start off with it bypassed.
I know that it's impossible for a mortal soul like me to cross whatever separates, to cross what we can see. And I know it's wishful thinking, and I know it cannot be. And I know I'll never feel you laying close to me. But can I try? Can I dream? Can I cross those boundaries?
So hopefully you could hear there as I switched it off and on that there was just a little bit more presence. Some of the quieter parts of the vocal were just lifted subtly. This is quite a subtle way of using it here. Now I went into that louder part and I quickly just want to demonstrate to you what the waveform here in this case was like before we use Fuel. It's being masked a little bit at the moment, so I'm going to switch off the before view so we can see the after view. And here you can see those peaks were quite clearly taken care of. Let's look at before and after. They were handled very, very well by Fuel in a way that I don't think that you would have noticed them. And these are quite significant transients, and it had to be sort of quick in terms of acting on them, and it's done a great job there in my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. The third way I'm going to use Fuel is on my drum bus to add a little bit of life and some punch to the drums. I'll essentially be using three controls here. The soft clipper to control the transients in a nice way. This also, of course, adds some saturation, and a byproduct of that is a little bit of compression. We'll also be using the thick control down here. Again, this will add some saturation, but also a tad of width. And then finally, I'll use the bass control to add just a little bit of punch to my kick. Let's dial in some settings and talk about the results in a moment. Okay, I'm reasonably happy with the results there. I could tweak it, but we're getting there. Let's have a listen to this again. I'll bring up my oscilloscope. Let's listen to it bypass to begin with, and then we'll hear the results and talk about them. So for me, you hear quite a lot more ring in the snare. The hi-hat's lifted a bit. The cymbals, definitely emphasize a little bit more. And overall, I do think it sounds a bit more lively. Now, I want to quickly talk about another thing you could potentially do here, and that's make use of the crunch control. So the crunch control is a kind of a fuzz distortion, I guess is the best way to describe it. You could use it just kind of subtly here, just on a few percent, to add a little bit of grit into those drums, or you could use it as kind of an effect on an extreme setting. Let's use it in both ways and see what you think. Comments down below. The fourth way I'm going to use fuel is on bass guitar. First of all, I'm going to be using it for compression. In my case here, I want to add some sustain to the longer notes to just help keep them present during the course of the note. The other thing, of course, that's going to be added is saturation, and you may find that saturation makes bass easier to hear, particularly on devices where we can't normally hear it that well, so like phone speakers, etc. I've already dialed in my settings here because you're familiar with the controls now, so I've added a little bit of compression here. I've added a little bit of body, which if you remember is kind of upward compression. I've used the soft clipper a little bit here, and I've also add a little bit in with the bass control. Let's go over straight away to my oscilloscope view and listen to a before and after. First of all, starting off with before. Now, it's a little subtle in this case, but you can sort of hear that that sustain just is allowed to ring on a little bit more with these settings. Fuel for me definitely falls into that this feels like cheating category of plugins. And you know what? At the end of the day, the end listener does not care a bit how difficult it was for you to achieve results, so long as you achieve results. Let me know in the comments down below if you think this plugin does achieve results with the few easy to use controls it provides. I'm Mike, I hope you will, and I'll see you in the next video.